on budget. If everyone can stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Hello to our big crowd. So nice to see everyone.
Yeah.
Okay, I will just turn the meeting right over. Staff,
Okay.
all yours.
Welcome, board members. This is our budget study session for the 2014-15 annual budget, and the tentative budget will be coming to you at our board of trustee meeting on June 9th. So this gives you a preview of what you'll see for approval that night. And before I start, I really do want to thank Leangela and Linda, who do the bulk of they're our administrators and fiscal, and they do the bulk of this work of really putting the detailed budgets together, do a lot of work on this. So, and I may even look to them on a couple issues. We are entering more stable budget years. I think I haven't been here for our past few years, but it was shared with me that we had some disaster plans, some fiscal crisis. We would have best case, worst case, middle of the road presented. This is a little more simple to me because the state is a little more stable. We aren't looking at drastic cuts. We're looking at some new funding. We still don't know exactly where to land, but what you'll see tonight is basically a presentation based on the January budget proposal by the governor that's fairly stable. So I'm going to start us through basically reiterating the budget process. January is when the governor's first budget proposal comes out, and we take that then and identify changes to income and expenditures. We did share a lot of information with the budget committee this year. That was kind of new under our governance structures, and they reviewed and analyzed some of the budget assumptions. New hires, retirements, and step and column costs are accounted for as much as we know. And we also went through a process of approving base budget augmentations that were fairly minimal. But that went through senior management and was presented to the District Government Senate. Those are included here as well. After that comes the May revise, and the governor proposes changes at that point. Used to be, and it seemed for years and years, January was kind of your low starting point, and then the governor would present better news in May, and it might even get a little better in June. It seems like the last couple of years, the governor starts high in January and then tones it down in May. I was a little surprised. So there were a few reductions in the May revision, nothing too large, but the revisions then are accounted for in our budget process. The tentative budget is created based on May revise and current state statutes, so that's what you're seeing tonight. And then when you do approve the tentative budget in June, that authorizes expenditures over summer prior to the final budget approval in September. So summer, or starting now, legislature has proposed their adjustments to the state allocation, and then this negotiation process starts. The governor, as of recent, I would say the governor usually wins. So if you hear that the Senate or the Assembly are proposing this and the governor wants that, the last few years, it usually leans his way. But it'll be interesting because they have proposed slightly higher funding. But then a state budget will be adopted by June 15th, and that's under the new state legislation that gave some teeth to what happens if they don't adopt it. Because you might recall, we used to always go into September or sometimes even October, and then the governor will approve it. Then at that point, we'll account for final changes to income expenditures, and then we'll bring the final budget to you for real approval in September. So these are the budget assumptions that you'll see in the tentative budget that comes in June, and in some of the summary numbers that I'll be presenting tonight. 2.75% is our largest new state funding, access funding. It used to be called growth. 1.1 million. Previously, you saw 3%. That was the January proposal, and that was 1.2 million. So not a big change, but it was 100,000 less. For us, it is primarily covering 11 new full-time. Oh, that's a typo by me. Sorry. Full-time faculty, or FTEF. Should be, not FTES. So you saw 9 in our budget assumptions that were presented. We also had a couple retirements, so we increased that to 11. 10 are funded out of the general fund unrestricted side. You'll also see 0.85% COLA here. That amounts to about $365,000 for us, and our step and column costs that you'll see in a bit are $373,000. So it's not a direct correlation, but that's to a degree where that money goes.
And that 0.85, Christine, is a tiny bit smaller than the 0.86 that was in January, just so you can make your connection. But in January, remember, COLA was 0.86, now it's a little bit smaller.
So not much difference. We were projecting $370,000, so $5,000 difference. We have included here health and welfare cap increase. We just took a 5-year average. What is health benefits increase? 5-year average is 5.66%. We took half of that. Reason being, that's what the classified bargaining unit had agreed to for the next year's increases. In their agreement, we, through action from the board, did the same for management, and then Costa is still awaiting a court resolution. So we went ahead and did budget for management and CSEA. We didn't know the actual increase as of last Friday, but that was after we kind of finalized our calculations and sent the tentative budget to printing. We found out that the average is about 7%. So we will, when we get the final budget, we'll have that 3.5% increase.
The actual is 7%,
Yes.
6.9 something?
Yes.
Okay.
Christine,
And, yeah,
can I go back to something?
sure.
Just to try and understand the government better. Do you think that 0.85% COLA being so close to step and column is accidental? Or do you think that was on purpose?
I think that's coincidental for us because our step and column just happened to land there, and I found out today how much ours can vary every year. I put that up there just to show kind of, we've gotten these general fund unrestricted dollars. This is where we're spending. I don't know whether district by district and K-12, because K-12 has the same COLA.
And it varies so much by district. Ours is, this is probably more coincidental with the dollar amounts
so.
roughly lined up.
The 0.85 COLA, that's not just for us. Everybody gets that. When I say everybody, junior colleges.
Yeah, I think it's under Prop 98. So all
It's a
community
cost of living.
colleges.
It's a statewide cost of living
Statewide.
adjustment
And
on community
K-12.
colleges.
And K-12.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember our step and column was always around 500,000.
You know, in my budget assumptions, I had 400,000, and that was based on the prior year. This year, we actually had quite a bit of discussion just today about this. This is just looking person by person and seeing what it comes out to. For instance, none of our deans have step increases in this next budget year, and that's pretty unusual. It's just where they happen to be in the salary schedule. So it may have been budgeted higher in prior years, I don't know.
Always seemed like it was around 500,000.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 Or it may be that that's what was budgeted for it.
Yeah, you know, I don't know who
Well,
was doing what.
I'm happy to see it's only 365.
Yeah, sometimes they pick a number and it's just a good average and then they'll run with it for about 5 years. And sometimes it's better to look back and say, hey, what is that actually costing us? So, additional assumptions, student success and student equity, we budgeted the same as prior year matriculation. That's $548,000 total, that's not each. So student success is really the new term for what used to be matric. And we just went ahead and budgeted based on last year because we're having trouble finding out. We know the total dollars at the state level that have been allocated, but we are not getting any information as to how they're going to be allocated to us. And student equity is a whole new pot. So the final budget I put could be as high as an additional $550,000 each. I should probably clarify. My dartboard says 250 maybe for student success. And student equity, we're still trying to figure out how they're doing that. In fact, we're probably going to follow up with some folks at the state and try and pin that down. But that's what we have in the tentative. Scheduled maintenance and instructional equipment usually come together from the state. At our first budget forums and the governor's January proposal, there was $175 million allocated to that pot to be split 50-50. Scheduled maintenance is what we use for deferred maintenance and repairs around the campuses. At May Revise, for some reason, he came out and said 0 to instructional equipment. We're going to put it all to scheduled maintenance. And we're also going to say a 0 match is required, which is new. I don't know where that'll end up in June, because there's a lot of discussion at the state. But for us, he also lowered the total amount to 148 million, which could be over $1 million for us. The tentative budget, though, we have built in zero, and LeAngela shared that that's usually what we do every year. We build in zero until we hear what they're really sending us. So that's over in restricted anyway, so it's not affecting our general fund unrestricted. Instructional equipment, this was a little bit of a surprise to say zero. Originally, he proposed what would have amounted to $650,000 for us. So I wanted to let you know what we did as a response to that. Last year was our first year again under our COS 2.0 of our above base resource allocation process. Last year, we allocated $200,000 to that. More than half of that came from the state instructional equipment pot. So if we don't have that, what we did in this tentative budget is go ahead and budget just one time, $200,000 to cover those above base resource allocation requests. 200,000 might be a little high. I hear historically we didn't always have that much available for above base, but I think we felt that we have good momentum coming out of our new governance structures and our new above base resource allocation process, and wanted to make that. That could be revised, but that's here in the tentative budget for now, the one-time allocation. Tentative budget additional assumptions. We are taking out a muni loan for cash flow purposes, which help us with property tax receipts. Costs will be minimal, $16,000 for the fee, and we budgeted $35,000 for interest. Could obviously be higher. I think it was a 1.9% interest rate that we estimated, or 1.97. But we don't know yet how much we'll need. We'll only draw down what we need. There will be no TRAN, and that's roughly $100,000 in savings. There were additional TRAN fees to apply for the TRAN, tax revenue anticipation note, but there was also interest earnings. So we're benefiting a little bit from having less of a cash flow need for the district. We don't know that we'll even have the 6.275. I'm hoping we can get that down in future years.
Christina,
Yes.
is this basically because the state is not deferring as much of our revenue as it used to?
Definitely. Yeah, they're almost completely caught up. The proposal for 14-15 was to be completely caught up, but then I think he pulled back on maybe a small portion of that, I forget. But this is hopefully more than enough to see us through kind of that, I think it's November and May mostly, right before the December and June property tax, or is it, I'm sorry, November.
December is when we really need it.
December, waiting the property taxes, okay. There were other changes, and I want you to be aware that are in this tentative budget. Some of these were included in our budget forums and the assumptions back then. Others were things we discovered kind of going through line by line. So we did lower our non-resident tuition by $100,000. That had been included in our earlier budget assumptions, and that's just because it's coming in close to $400,000 and $500,000. We lowered lottery this year by $200,000. We have a lower base FTS and they're basing it on, and then our historical dollars. We just felt like we needed to true that up. So those are two things that hit our general fund unrestricted. But you'll see we also have some pluses in our general fund unrestricted. There was PERS Golden Handshake from a few years back that was being paid and is no longer due in 14-15. And I hadn't known that prior to the earlier budget assumptions, but we, coming through our budget, this is a big difference, a big help to our general fund, $385,000 annual payment and $33,000 interest. So got that cleared up. Going the other way, and I'm going to speak about this a little bit more a little later in our presentation, but you probably heard that the governor proposed, again, it's not law, to increase the employer contribution to STRS. We did increase it to $257,000 in the full budget. $238,000 is our unrestricted side, to increase our contribution to 9.5%. We're not sure what will come out in the wash with the final budget, because as I'll present to you in a minute, the Senate and Assembly are already proposing a little slower phase-in. But again, you never know who's going to win that arm wrestling match at the state. To Larry Provost, in the budget assumptions in our budget forums, I had that in as a placeholder for 14-15. Looks like we'll be extending that until 15-16, and we'll have Dr. Dudo coming back for one more year on a greatly reduced pay. So that freed up some general fund dollars. So when it all comes out in the wash, this is where we landed, looking at the overview and the document that you'll see in June. This is just a real summary of all those numbers that basically we'll be asking the board to approve or adopt as our budget. But for the unrestricted side, 49.28 million in revenues and 49.24 in expenditures. And so our surplus is, which is great to see a surplus, 44,500. And then when you combine the two, you have some additional federal revenues, some additional other state categorical revenues. And so you have almost 58 million in revenues and 57.9 million in expenditures. So the same surplus, which is how it works for our budgets. So I'm trying to think, there's probably nothing specific there, but you may have questions.
So
Yeah.
whatever is added to the combined, obviously, is a wash, revenues and expenses.
Most of those are our categorical or restricted programs, and we always budget expenditures. So basically, that's how the programs are set up, to spend 100% of the
Yeah, they
revenues
have to zero out.
in any given year. Now, many times they don't, and we'll have carryover, and that's why you'll see a big bump up later in the fall, and it's usually on the restricted side of general fund, and it's dollars that are being spent. But basically, the requirements of the programs are such that we need to do that. This is kind of exciting news to me, but I wanted to share with you, again, what's in the tentative budget that we're proposing. You will see, when you actually see the budget, that we're including a fund balance that's higher. And I want to get to that here on my papers as well. The beginning fund balance, you're probably used to seeing 2.7, 2.8 million, maybe 2.9, which is close to our 6%. We have also had on the side, it's actually sat as a liability and deferred revenue, almost $1 million of indirect reserve, and I think there's some mandate reserve in there as well. And we've called that, we've shown it to the board, I think, year after year, as what we were going to use for our fiscal solvency and what the funds we were going to draw down in case deficit spending required that. It was probably higher at one time. But that's what's remaining there, and given that we're not in this deficit crisis situation, I think it behooves us and would be appropriate to let that money fall basically to fund balance. So it will kick our fund balance up about $1 million, and we'd be looking at proposing for next year a beginning balance of 3.9. The surplus that you just saw is minimal there, and an ending balance of similarly 3.983 million. Looking at where we've been, we've often referred to our 6% reserve for economic uncertainties, which is our board policy. The state's policy is 5%, but this is where it would be for next year's budget. That's the dollar amount. This is the additional funding, which is kind of comprised of that million and a little bit of surplus. That this is the additional fund balance that will be available to get us up to really meeting our board priority of 8%, which I think is very healthy for our district. Something I do want to say, additional funds are expected to fall to balance, to fund balance at the close of each year. So this beginning could be higher, and the ending, obviously, a year down the road might be higher as well. But one of the reasons I just wanted to reiterate, to me, why fund balance is important. I mean, it really is there for those cash flow crisis critical times. And just to know that at 4%, we could only pay 2 weeks of our bills. Our bills are about 4.1 million average. We're actually closer to 4.4 or 4.5 million in our busy months, and then we drop lower in summer. But about 4.1 million. So in 3 weeks, at a 6%, we weren't even meeting three weeks of general fund expenditures. If we get it up to 8 or 8.3, even higher than 8, you can meet 1 month. And then the state average, the last I did here was a 16%. So just to kind of compare where we are as College of the Sequoias to the state average. You'll probably hear me share from time to time. I think 8% is a very good target, and I wouldn't even mind seeing it up to 10% or something like
We
that.
like 16 now.
Oh, okay.
When you look across the 112 colleges,
That
and
is
the
the
average
average.
is 16%.
It makes sense though, if that's the time frame that you have to get you by, if it's truly considered a rainy day fund, I mean, that's what you
For
would want to
economic
cover.
uncertainties, yeah. It
Yeah,
just
we-
shows you how tough it's been for us with that reserve running so well.
If you have the courage, do what you gotta do when things when budgets go south, you don't need to do the reserve. Which gives us, that when things are good, it gives us the ability to do more good stuff. And so, it feels better to have reserve because it insulates us from tough decisions when things get bad. I'm not so sure I'm a big fan of big reserves for the reasons I just described.
Yeah, it just seems like with the state, in terms of cash flow and those types of things, it makes sense to have your own
Your own
money.
cash.
Yeah, I guess, but
Well, I
borrowing
wasn't-
1.9.
I wasn't criticizing this, I was pushing back on 16%.
I guess
But
another.
10% could be a pretty good goal.
It could be, it's just for discussion purposes tonight, yeah.
I like it.
Another
Lori, I
perspective,
like 16.
another perspective, John, is that while we have the courage, I think, to do what's necessary when budget times are difficult, sometimes our courage gets tested a little bit with things that we know are really good for our students. And we end up making some reductions that take our courage, but also impact our programs negatively. It'd be nice to have the ability to make the courageous cuts, but preserve the ones that we really know are valuable to students, with the reserve somewhere maybe in between our 5 or 6% and the 16%.
Are you defending 8 or 10, or are you defending 16?
I'm defending 8 or 10, or
Well,
somewhere in that middle.
You won't, I don't resist that.
Somewhere in that middle, so that the spike in valley is not so drastic.
Okay. Good discussion. This is also for your information regarding assumptions. The 1% is not built in, but I just wanted you to be aware of what those dollars are, because we'll always be considering that in our negotiations discussions. So for the district as a whole, unrestricted, about $290,000 for a 1%, $330,000 combined throughout the general fund. Step and column, this is where it came out this year as we put people in. Although I have to say that is my best guess. We're still trying to pin down the COSAPA costs there. I think the computer's blocking it. I apologize, but if you have your page, the first line is what's in the budget is the half of the 5.66% increase, which came out to these dollars. So for health and welfare costs, just to, to build our budget, we put that half in. Looking at, we can't see it there, but the 7%. What we did, and this was based on language that was with CSEA in our agreement, but PPO4 RXA is our largest plan. It's the one that most of our employees are on. So 50% of that would happen to be very close to these dollars. So you may see that increase, which will eat up a little bit more of the general fund we will see an increase as we get it into the final budget in September. FTS, I thought it'd be helpful to update this. I don't think we necessarily need all the history, but it's always good to have. You've seen this slide a number of times. We will, in fact, in the very next slide, I'll give you more details, but for 13-14, you might recall we had targeted a mid-sized college threshold, and it looks like we've made that goal fairly comfortably. We're now, as of today, at 94.96 FTS for the current year. We'll be funded by the state at 87.81, and that's our most recent calculation. I'm learning that every time the state does a recalc, those numbers can change, but that looks it'll be very close to that for 13-14. 14-15, the 9100 is really just, from a fiscal standpoint, my projections at this point. I have not met really with the other vice presidents to sit down and say, what are we truly targeting for next fall week, or for next year? We've had initial discussions which helped us build our fall schedule. So I'll explain a little bit more about that. And our best guess at a projection of what the state will fund would be a little over 9,000 in FTS. Something that's interesting, that if we are funded at over 9,000, you'll notice that's really the highest of all the history except for 0809. So we're getting back to a good place from the state. The other thing, though, that we'll discuss is the mid-sized college threshold, because we could breathe a little sigh of relief having made it for 13-14, but that next 3-year target comes up pretty fast. And how high will that be? Will it be all the way back up to 10,000 in order to receive that funding? So there'll be some good discussion happening in the next year. This is as of today, and our technology department updates me daily on our FTS that we've earned, and I usually pass that on to the other VPs and student services. And these are our counts. Summer 2013 is our actual FTES. Fall is actual at almost 4,500. Spring 2014, this is really close. Just today, we got our actual hours of attendance. If you've heard us say we're waiting to calculate those, but we needed spring to close, and we needed the faculty to turn those numbers in. So this is looking pretty good. These are actual numbers. A little bit could go up or down as we finish out our calculations and submit to the state. And 550 is our actual count of enrollment today for summer 2014. So we're at 94, 96. Our target, the state is saying to make mid-sized college threshold for 13-14, you need to be at 93.75. That will be recalculated again a couple times in the next 6 months or so, but it will stay very close to that. So our target was 94. We've made it pretty easily. And that's a good place to be for us right now. For next year, what I've done really in this preliminary projections, this is 14-15, this is looking back at 13-14. Where were we kind of in fall and spring? 44.74, 42.04. What's kind of close to that? So right here I'm at 44.60 and 42.45. So if we have similar fall and spring, we won't have any summer to count, but we will have the following summer. Where do we need to size that summer to reach a goal? And we may want to go higher than 9,100. We're not required to reach anything per se. We need to do what we can afford. So the budget is built on the classes that we've planned and something basically very similar to 13-14. So, and again, the goal for the mid-sized college will most likely increase. We just need to find out what that new target will be. But this is not set in stone. This can increase either semester or summer.
So we're counting two summer, the 2 years of summer in this last fiscal year in order to get our numbers out, is that?
Yeah,
Yes.
and that's something the state allows, and
We have the
apparently
flexibility to put a summer on either end, Ken.
colleges do it apparently all the time, listening to some of my CBO listservs and some speakers that I've heard.
So-
And, yeah,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
but then obviously it does limit you for future years.
Right, and is
So,
that why then we're dropping to 9,100?
yes.
And so, I know you might have mentioned this, but is that gonna have an impact on our meeting our goals, with dropping from 94 to 91?
You know, the goal, I probably should have taken the term goal out there. We won't have a specific goal. We, under the way the state statutes work, we are okay. We're basically in a safe harbor for 2 more years after we've met
Okay, so
it.
you meet it one time? and
Yeah.
go get
What
it.
we're beginning with that
Right.
new 9,100 is we're
Right.
beginning our look forward, Ken, and what we need to make the next 3 years out.
Okay.
For our base, you can miss your base 1 year and go into what they call recovery, which we did during Dr. Goodyear's year. Had to come back up and meet our base, or we didn't meet our base that second year, that would become our new base. So we don't, you never want to go into recovery 2 years in a row. And then what Christine is saying is, this year, our current year, we're gonna hit our mid-sized college of 93.75. That'll go up a little bit. We won't need to make it next year or the year after, but that third year out, if we want to continue getting that $1.1 million for being a mid-size, we'll have to make it that year with whatever that increased number is. So it may, at that point, it probably won't be 93.75, it'll be more like 97.
They'll be recalculated.
During that year, we will have the option of sandwiching another couple of summers around that year and doing that again. Even if it means, even if it means using both summers in the following year going into recovery because we didn't have a summer just to meet our base.
So.
Does that make sense?
So, and when he talks about base, the only thing if there comes a year where we can't count any summer, because we're gonna save that summer for the next year, to sandwich 2 summers, what we'll have to do is make sure we make the state funded base, that's what we'll wanna do. Or, well, I guess you're even protected for 1 year, but that would be your goal. So this will continue to march up a little bit, and our primary goal is to stay ahead of that, but also to find out where we think that target will be 3 years from now.
Seems like the good news there is where the gap between our actual FTES and our
Right.
funded FTES has narrowed so much that we're only deficit at 67.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that
Based on those numbers, so.
really, Ken, that's a credit to most of the people you see sitting in this room. When we put together the enrollment management team, and we all started to better collectively understand the impact of expanding enrollment up and contracting it back, we deliberately tried to close that gap. Because what we didn't want to do was go so far into achieving the mid-sized college threshold that the next year we had to shock the institution by reducing it down by such a significant number as we have in the past. So a lot of hard work went into making that a small gap right there. We don't feel like we've mastered this, but we're feeling much more confident at our ability to manipulate this positively so that we prevent those big spikes and big drops. Whereas before, I think we unintentionally made decisions that ended up in big spikes and big drops. We've thought a lot more about how to avoid that now.
Yeah, at the top, I mentioned enrollment management team is monitoring, and the 3 vice presidents meet with some other staff and deans. And we're trying to just stay on top of this and make sure that our projections are correct and the class numbers that are scheduled are what we need. This is for your information regarding our categorical programs. And these are just some of the major categorical programs. But basically, just so you know, that the tentative budget will include, most of it is very similar to the prior year. This is our 14-15 budgets, and this is 13-14 of what we did receive in revenues. The only things, let's see, student success I mentioned, that'll be broken out between student success and student equity. And I do anticipate larger dollars, we just are not sure what those are yet. So the 0 in student equity should be a fairly large pot next year. Scheduled maintenance, I mentioned, that'll be big. I mean, originally we were saying 650 to 670,000. The new May revise says over $1 million. 109,000 is what they're used to receiving, or coming off of 3 years. 3 years of 0. So, and instructional equipment, that's the one that is a surprise. And as I'll mention, the Senate and Assembly are pushing to get some dollars in there. So legislature has come out with their budget proposals. I think Senate has passed theirs, and everyone is saying the Assembly concurs, whether or not they've actually passed it yet. They're saying that there's an additional $2.5 billion in the state revenue that the governor's not recognizing. You might recall, he's been pretty conservative in his fiscal projections. It's helped him at the state budget level quite a bit. But what he does is he shoots low. When you say, what are we going to bring in the state in revenue? He's shooting lower, whereas everyone else is shooting higher. So the legislature is shooting higher here. The legislative analyst's office, though.
Go figure.
Yeah.
Right.
What's a little
I've been doing that for the
surprising.
last 10 years.
Yeah, the LAO though kind of concurs with Senate and Assembly right now. So the LAO is usually pretty fiscally conservative. But
Well, weren't they saying those were one-time capital gains money, and that's why they were afraid to build them in? Is that correct? Isn't that why
That's
they
some
didn't
of
want to
it.
go?
that's a
some of
big
it.
part of what the
That
governor's
number fluctuates so
been
much.
saying for
There's
many
one
years.
time.
So what the governor's position has been, he's not disagreeing that there's going to be additional money. He's not willing to build a budget on revenue that's not ongoing.
Which makes sense.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
actually, the insiders up there told me that they really believe in the 6 or 7 billion, but the government wants to
So they may be accounting for some of it being one time, but in addition to that, John, there's still more ongoing than what the governor's willing to
Well,
recognize.
they're just comparing what they think tax revenues will be versus what so far budgeted.
Yeah.
And legislature would like to spend it all, and the government will spend any of it.
Yeah. The delineation that I've heard has been that the governor's identified what he believes is gonna be a portion of that revenue from capital gains, which is one time, and he's not willing to build any ongoing expenses on that. So when we get into that big bulk of whatever the new tax revenues are, the devil is gonna be in what are the source of those taxes. If they're one-time taxes, I think he's gonna dig in a little bit and not wanna spend them on ongoing expenses, which we would agree with.
Well, we also need to remember the state has 340 billion, or, yeah, 340 billion in debt that has not, they're not paying back. So that's why government paying on that 6% billion.
Yeah, you have to admire him for that. He keeps talking about paying down the wall of debt, so.
Which is 340 billion.
Yeah. That's a big wall.
That's why he increased the STRS.
Hey, 2.5 billion goes towards that, it's a start.
There you go. So this
Baby
is
steps.
what the legislature is proposing anyway. There was a chart that Scott Lay sent out, and there were probably 20 categorical programs that he was saying they're proposing funding. But for community colleges, primarily the large ones were DSPS, EOP&S, and instructional equipment, as I mentioned. They're saying let's put some funding toward that. Some others that weren't quite as large, but were interesting, part-time faculty office hours, and some additional earmarked for student success, I think was for specific purposes within student success. There was some possible unrestricted funding increase proposed as well. They are proposing an increase to the COLA to 1.7%. Estimate for us would be about $370,000 there, plus or minus. And well, before I go on to that, when this was presented to me, it was presented by Scott Lay there. He spends a lot of time in Sacramento, and he was saying, don't hang your head on this. It's just like any negotiations. They start high, governor's low, and they meet somewhere in the middle. But if you do base it on the last almost 4 years, the governor tends to win a little bit more than the legislature, so we'll see. But he said, don't count on that. He says that's their starting point, so it'll be somewhere in between. The other part of the unrestricted was $25 million at the state level, which isn't big for us, but the wording was convert part-time faculty to full-time. So very intriguing, very confusing. I have no idea, no one knows what they mean by that. But, so it's not necessarily for more larger FON or full-time faculty, it's specifically convert part-time faculty to full-time. So I'm sure we'll hear more. Okay.
Christine,
Yeah.
the next, go back to page 8, the COLA at 1.7, the plus 370, is that 370 in addition to what
Yeah.
we recognized on the
It
0.85?
basically double Ken, because we have the 0.85, this is double
Yeah.
that.
I probably should have put 365,000 to be exact,
Okay,
but
got it.
yeah, it's an exact double of what the governor's proposing. Okay, what I want to get into next is kind of related to budget because of the STRS increase that you saw us budgeting. But I wanted to explain, and I'll try not to spend too much time on this, but it was very fascinating. I was at an ACPO conference. Yeah, and GASB 68 is a new government accounting standards board promulgation that is federally pronounced, and basically all agencies receiving federal funds need to comply, or basically for accounting standards we need to comply. So this is regarding the STRS unfunded liability, also known as the net pension liability. This is really big news. I've heard whispers of it, and I finally understand it as much as I think I can right now. But GASB 68 requires plan employers to report a proportionate share of their pension plan's net pension liability on their financial statements by fiscal year 14-15, which we are entering right now. So this is big news. We won't issue our financial statements till December because the board probably won't see them until February 2016. That's why it doesn't seem pressing. We don't have to do anything on our banner system. We don't have to fund this. We're just saying when the auditors come in and help us prepare our financial statements, there's going to be a huge liability. And I'll get into it a little bit more. To the extent that the plan does not have projected assets to pay projected benefits, GASB requires employers to report a proportionate share of the unfunded portion of pension benefits to date. At first, it fascinated me that they were saying that I thought it was a state liability. I really didn't understand that such a large portion of it is. It's actually threefold. It's employee, employer, and the state. And so that's part of that chart you saw. Previously, this type of reporting was not a requirement. This is the unfunded liability at the state level, 73.7 billion. The state, or STRS, as they do their actuarial projections, they assume a 7.5% rate of return, also called a discount rate. I don't think they've been really far off that, but they've had some very bad years. The feds came in and said, yeah,
This says 73.7 billion state unfunded liability. Is that the state's portion or everybody's?
that's everything.
All right.
Yes, that's a good point. I probably should have said STRS, but state as a whole. State as a whole is what I intended there. The feds are saying that's actually 167 billion. They've done their own calculation. The difference is a different rate of return that they're assuming. They call it a blended rate, and I didn't hear all the details as to the why, saying that the debt must be shared by all agencies on individual financial statements. I saw some pretty scary charts showing how quickly the funds are being dried up. Basically, since inception, STRS has never been fully funded. There were 3 years when it went over and actually met fully funding, just barely, and then it just crashed, probably the last decade, the last 5 years. GASB 68, this is just a sample of what it's going to do to our financial statement. We literally now have 2 paragraphs covering STRS in our audited financial statement. They said it will increase to 10 pages on STRS alone. That's
Yeah,
mind-blowing to me.
increase our fee by.
Yeah, I know. That was
And
exactly
and it's not gonna make a difference in our
Darn
money we put away.
Darn auditors.
Yeah.
We always blame the Gasbys, you know?
Yeah, you should,
The Great Gatsby.
they should. That just, I mean, Ken knows, preparing financial statements for governmental entities, there's nothing that warrants 10 pages worth of, so this is a big deal. Just so you know, STRS will do an actuarial study, STRS here in California, and that will calculate each community college's liability. When STRS presented this, they were saying that it's actually recommended for each district to do their own. Personally, I'd rather be a late adopter. I'd rather have them do that. Let's get our number. We'll start to work with that and find out, how the cards fall. And if we decide we need to do our own, great. But they couldn't even really explain how you would do your own. So it's also new. So that's probably something we will receive, I'd say, in the next few months from STRS, maybe the next 6 months. The governor proposed, and this was the shock that came with May revise, because there were no whispers about increasing the employer contribution for 1450. And with May revise, he said employers are going to increase an 8.25% contribution to 9.5. They also, I guess he proposed the 9.2 for employee, which is a big deal. I hadn't really seen that. And you'll see, we have pre-2013, which was that PEPRA, pension reform, passed at the state level, and post-2013. And then you have the state share, which is 3.1%. So employee contribution aside, which we'll see what comes out with the final budget, that was a real big jump from 8.25% to 9.5%. And you saw that was, 278,000 or so for our district alone. But you can see it climbs up by 2021 to 19%. And what's really interesting is since inception, it's been close to a 50-50. It's been employer, employee. Mr. Mann and I were talking about this. And suddenly
Look at
they're
that gap
saying,
now.
yeah, they're
That's
saying,
amazing.
no, we're gonna put it all on the employer.
2/3, 1/3, yeah.
And the sad thing is, that student programs and student services and staff salaries are what's gonna suffer for that. It's just an unfortunate situation.
Is it, I'm sorry, Ken.
Go ahead, Sonny.
Christina, am I reading that right, that we're gonna have to keep track of 2 STRS rates for employees hired before 13 and after 13?
Yes, and
So-
we were going to anyway because of the PEPRA law. But what's really interesting to me is that the pre-2013 goes up so much higher
Yeah.
than the
But
post.
the
Opposite of first,
Yeah.
2 tiers.
the two employee contributions, you've got employees before 13, employees after 13,
Yes.
is roughly the equivalent of the employers.
No. It's just different employees. It's
No, I
different-
know, I
yeah,
know.
got it. Yeah, but adding it together, you don't add that
I
together.
know, I
Got it,
know.
okay.
Is the rationale for the different rates because they're deeming the post-13 employees weren't part of the short, weren't part of how we got so far underfunded, or?
No, but I haven't had time to research or ask questions. At first, I thought it was simply because this is law, this is a recent law, and perhaps they didn't have the authority to usurp that law, and so they had to put it all on the free. But what it may be is the posts have a lesser benefit, they have a lesser benefit. So I don't know if perhaps they're just saying they have a lesser benefit, so they should have a lesser cost. I haven't
Well,
researched that.
you can't charge them more for a lesser benefit, so that would make sense.
But the employer is paying the same rate whether they're pre or post.
Good point.
Yeah.
My understanding of that is, because CalPERS did the same thing, is the pre-employees have a shorter time to make up, so they're getting charged more to make up the difference.
Hmm.
That's my
That
understanding.
could be. I
Since
could-
they're gonna be retiring sooner, they have a shorter amount of time to make up their difference,
They're gonna make them
what I
pay.
understood.
No, a bigger thing is there, if you look like the employer share at 8.25 now and 7 years out, it's 19.1, it's 11% different. From the employer's perspective, we have to give employees an 11% raise and then take it back from them, just to pay the bill.
Right.
So money's gotta come from
Or the,
somewhere.
yeah, some equivalent of
This
that compensation.
this can't be a nice thing to contemplate.
Right.
Yeah. It's not good news. What,
So unless the state likes colas that are 3 or 4%, it's
Yeah.
not good for employees.
what,
think-
I'll say real quick, this totals to that 73, almost 74 billion. So that's the state and STRS plan, well, actually the governor's
To
plan.
make up the
To make up
shortfall.
the shortfall. Doesn't make up that 167 billion.
Is, between the 213 or the 2013 hires, are they on a different retirement?
They are.
In the end, they're on a different?
They are, what I don't know, I don't think that it's defined contribution versus defined benefit. I think they're still defined benefit, I'm wondering if anyone knows. But I think they get a lesser percentage and have to retire later. I just should have researched it. Do you
Correct.
remember? You know?
You're
Okay.
correct on what you just said.
Right.
STRS, see, I know PERS did something very similar,
Yeah.
so.
Right.
So, well, now that I've shared that with you, here's Senate. So very similar, they're still making up the total 74 billion. They're still getting to 19.10% per employer. All they did was phase it in a little more slowly here in the first couple of years,
Yeah,
so.
slim.
Actually, maybe it was, oh yeah, the first 3 years really are better.
Mhm.
So that might gain some traction. There's a little help there. And if that's the case, then what we've budgeted right now in the tentative budget that you've seen will be a little relief.
And they're still using a 7% rate of return to calculate this?
They are, it's the 7.5%.
So it's really worse than that.
It is, I don't think they're gonna be required, well, actually, they're not being required to make up anything. They just see
You're
a
right.
very
Yeah.
real dollar problem looming in the future. They know they have to make it up. So what I envision is this may actually make up their dollar problem, but the rest would remain on our books as an unfunded liability according to the federal government's calculations.
Yeah.
According to their tables, it would take 33 years of
Oh,
this
yeah.
to be fully funded.
Yeah, it's not magic after 20.
By the time you retire, Steve.
No, I ain't gonna be here that long.
How reliable are federal calculations if they're like everything else? We can't
Yeah.
put them on the stock.
You know, my response was that the federal seemed much more reasonable than the state, the 4.85% rate of return versus 7.5. But then the speaker from STRS said that they've been very close to getting the 7.5%. I just didn't catch, is that for all history of the last 10 years or 20?
He said that?
The speaker from STRS.
Not what I've seen.
And I know they had some terrible years where they did, so I think he was trying to do about a 20-year average. But the federal looks more reasonable to me.
Who's writing this paycheck?
The last couple were pretty good.
I'll get his name. Yeah, I think the last couple have made up for a few of the
Right.
bad ones. As long as we're talking retirement things, I just thought I would mention, to give you a quick update on other post-employment benefits, GASB 45. Just a reminder that we do have the irrevocable trust. The current balance, because there has been some return on investment there, is 5.7 million, and I think generally we've referred to a lower 5 million in some of our discussions, because it was lower fives when the last actuarial study was done. The study was as of December 2012, even though it was dated May 2013, and our unfunded liability was 8 million at that time, but the total accrued liability was 13.2. So roughly the 13.2 minus what was about 5 million at the time got us to about 8 million in the unfunded. Still a large amount. And the reason I wanted to bring it up is, and not for any decisions really today, but at some point I may bring forward the idea of funding it a little bit more incrementally, starting in 15, 16. We'll see how the budget years are. But just so you know, nothing's included in the 14, 15 tentative budget.
So we're remaining with our pay-as-you-go decision that we made in the adjustment when we were back in the recession. I think what Christine and I want to put on everybody's radar is, as budgets improve again, this is something that we have to keep in mind.
And another reason that kind of came to me is, if we're gonna be adding immense amounts of additional debt on our financial statements,
This is
it might
only
be-
gonna grow.
It might behoove us to try and pay down. This is kind of like picking that small credit card and trying to pay that down.
So this one is already on there, and now the STRS will also be?
You know,
Yeah, that's gonna make those financials look quite a bit.
I will just tell you what the STRS gentleman, STRS speaker said. He said, take your long-term debt on your financial statements and triple it, and he thinks that's just a real rough average of what will be on financial statements. We have 112 million, so we'd be looking at 336 million of long-term debt. What it does is it just dings your credit rating and affects any time you go out for bonds or do financing. So it's very unfortunate, but everyone in the state is going to be in the same boat, so.
Yeah, but I think the quicker we can make it a priority, then.
Oh, for this,
And
for
we
this,
start- For
you
just
mean,
getting,
yeah.
just getting those funded, somehow making some sort of
Paying
plan.
attention to it, right, paying attention to it.
So that is it. We'll be bringing the tentative budget June 9th board meeting. Any other questions or comments?
Christine, can I go back to, maybe I know I just mentioned this, but I need a little bit more clarification on page, yeah, page 6, the top part again.
Okay. I get-
For instance, the top line there, cost of 1%,
Oh,
for the various categories. Now, is that a 1%, what, increase in salary?
It is.
Okay, so that's.
No.
It's just really for your information. Sorry, I'm getting there.
So that's,
Right there.
It just keeps going too fast.
Right there.
So, as
Right.
we begin our negotiations for the next year.
so that would be the,
Oh,
so
yeah, I see
it would
that.
be, the combined would be 1 plus the step and column of 160,
Well,
or
yes, the step and column is already built into our budget.
that's in the budget,
Uh-huh.
but the
Anyone,
the top part is not.
yeah, any salary increase is not.
And then the bottom part is the,
Yeah.
health benefits.
And what we showed you with those two rows across the bottom, Ken, is that we had tried to anticipate what we're already obligated to, which is a 50% increase in 50% of the share of the health and welfare increase.
Yeah,
which
we're
is-
splitting that with
Right.
CCA.
We showed you what we had planned for in the first one, and then we actually got the rates. And so we're showing you that we're gonna, tell me if I'm right, Christine, we're gonna be adjusting from the 62 to the 75, from the 21.6 to the 25. We're not paying both of those.
Okay, so this is the
Yeah,
anticipated.
the bottom row is actually what we know now is actual.
Okay,
And,
Assuming we don't negotiate anything different, that would be our obligation based on the commitment we have in the contract.
Right.
Right.
got it.
And then on the 1%, why do you do the unrestricted and combined?
I do that because I generally am always focused on unrestricted. How much can you afford? What's your unrestricted general fund, and how much can you afford? Restricted, we always find a way to pay it out of those restricted programs, because if we didn't, we would then be creating a general fund contribution to the restricted programs. We do make contributions to DRC or DSPS, but not much. Right now, all we're contributing is what we're required to contribute. For special.
So the other way-
1% rate, some of those are in those
They
restricted categories,
are.
so you're including them as well.
For information here, they're not budgeted, but does that
Okay.
make sense?
Yeah, none of this is budgeted.
Right, no, but for information, but if you were, if say we did a 1%,
Mhm.
it would be the combined number, would be the one, or are you saying there's money in the restricted funds to usually cover that? Or am I
Well,
getting confused?
it would be combined.
Okay,
And I don't know what you're most familiar seeing, I'm trying to see, but when you saw the overall numbers, I'm always gonna probably focus mainly on your general fund unrestricted, because that's what your fund balance grows or shrinks from. Your restricted, we always find the program manager always finds ways, they either lower materials and expenses, or they might even have a temporary position that they have to let go. They always find ways to pay with them. Yeah.
Yes, and that, can you go back to that other slide for a minute, Christine? I want to try to explain this in a different way, and maybe it will help. But the cost of the 1% combined is to take our unrestricted cost plus our unrestricted plus the restricted, and we get a total. In other words, the 289 plus our restricted equals a total of 329.
Correct.
Okay, so one of the reasons we do this too, Lori, is if I'm running one of those restricted programs and nobody tells me, which happens a lot in bureaucracies like ours, no one tells me out in categorical program land that we're agreeing to a 1% salary increase. And now I get a bill from the general fund that I've got to take my restricted grant and pay a 1% salary increase on these employees that I didn't budget for. So suddenly I gotta go and either reduce a position, cut some instructional equipment, I have to do something else in the budget to make it work. So at least by putting it there, we're making sure everybody knows that we're not only showing you what it's gonna cost the general fund, but for all of our categorical programs that are running restricted budgets, this would be the cost if we do a 1%, because we're gonna apply it the same to everybody. We're not gonna say if you work in a grant funded program, you don't get the raise.
right, but do they have to pay it out of their restricted?
They
or
do,
can
yeah.
can the general fund pay for it?
Well, the general fund
General
could,
fund
but
could,
we're,
that's not what-
we're basing this assumption on the fact that whatever we pay for whatever we agree to outside the general fund is gonna be paid by that restricted budget.
Okay, yeah, understood.
But that's the reason we put it up there, so if I'm running that restricted budget, I know that.
I wanted to ask, are there any others that we contribute to?
No, and the DRC isn't really a contribution,
Yeah.
we're required. to
Maintenance
pay
of
it
effort.
Because of, not maintenance of
It's not.
effort, it's special class revenue.
I got
So
you.
we have classes, learning skills labs that generate FTES, and we're required by law to give them 70% of that revenue. That they then are required to spend in year that it's in.
That would be an obligation we have in addition to any MOE that we would have to keep.
Yes.
I'm sure you covered this, but I'm not absorbing it. In recent years, our budget, when structural imbalance in debt, balance of budget, we borrowed money from reserves. What are you doing this coming year?
Okay, recent year borrowing from reserves, I think we usually call that a fund balance draw unless we were calling it in the one-time indirect.
That 44,000 is the other direction.
It is the
Correct,
other
John.
direction, we don't need anything.
44 is now surplus.
Now, I saw something that was a year or two ago that showed what you thought it'd be in several years out. Is it black or red?
Oh, you'll see that, in June.
It's a surprise.
We're still trying to
Don't
make it,
spoil it.
we're still trying to make it right.
That's where maybe we might do our best and our worst. And I don't know if I used to always go out 2 years. I think here, I don't know if we started going out 2.
We do 1 plus 2, current year and
Current
2
plus
more.
1 or 2 more, okay.
Yeah.
It depends on what you assume. For instance,
You assume something.
in the
Is
K-12,
it
well,
black
lots
or
of
red?
assumptions, but really with state revenue, if you assume 0 state revenue, 0 additional funding, then you'll always be in the red. A little bit on year one and worse in year two.
Well, I'm not gonna try to be like that.
Okay.
You have done your best to make some kind of a guess.
Uh-huh.
Does that plan include red or black?
I think it'll be black, but I'm basing that on the state
Oh,
continuing
I
to bounce
know
back.
full well that
Yeah.
no matter, you either be wrong, high or low. I
Yeah.
mean, just because you don't control the problem,
Yeah.
but we've had this discussion the last several years.
been
We
red.
were promised red ink from now on.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, we were
Two years ago.
what we're looking at, John, are state indices and dartboards for what their projected revenues will be. And using those, we're gonna show you black.
Well, I want to hear.
But,
Because what we've been fighting the last several years is in fact, remember, we forced the process to include multiple years.
Right.
And it scared us.
yeah, so we could see if it
And,
just stayed that.
And we need to keep doing
How's it
that.
going
Even if you're
after
just
that?
guessing, you still need to keep doing it.
Right.
Well,
Yeah, once you have a model, and you have that, you guys.
Yeah, our fiscal solvency
You've done a good
plan
job of
now
that, yeah.
can just be our fiscal stability plan. It doesn't need to be solvency anymore, but we can show using those
And Angela
predictors.
was a tremendous help for the last several years, having the courage to say, well, this is my guess.
Right.
Well, yeah, and going forward, here we go, all these costs are going up, and the state's kind of telling us they're not gonna give us any more money, what are we gonna do?
Right.
There were big gaps.
Great.
So it's definitely a better time. It's not fabulous yet, but it's definitely better.
You know, I get to be real tough at college, you know, it's important for everybody that works here to look at that slide, not that one, the one that shows,
The 44.
no, the one that shows 19% contribution by the employer,
Oh,
11 or whatever with the other.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Because, money's gonna come from somewhere, and if that represents 11, let's see here,
Yes.
11 plus 2 is 13% more cost, they come out of the air, and
Right.
the discussions will take place, or not something we're looking forward to.
Well, and we have to also, I think, be prepared for increased healthcare. I mean, we hear it every day. It's not going down, but with all the new, Affordable Care Act, nothing's gonna be
But I
going down.
can
In fact,
see a
it's expected
discussion,
to go up.
see a discussion says, well, employee, here's your 3% raise that we're sending to Sacramento.
Yeah. One of the reasons, this might be a little bit of conspiracy theory on my part, but one of the reasons I think the governor picked this year, he was opportunistic, because this crisis has been looming for a while. But he picked this year, because if you're on the K-12 side of the ledger right now, and you're getting the local control funding formula applied to you, our local districts are picking up 12, 16% new revenue. While he's rolling that new money into these local school
He's going
districts,
everywhere.
he's saying, here's where it needs to go.
Right.
And that's his way of kind of getting your local money, but all the time convincing you that you have a local
It's your money.
control.
It's your
You
money,
have a
we're gonna
local
have to pour
control,
back.
but by the way, we're gonna increase your
bill's
contribution to
going
the
up to us.
retirement system. So he's figuring out a way to put the money out to the local districts and get it back into the retirement system.
But
Yeah.
the lawyer said he was a dumb politician.
There's something similar coming down the pike with PERS. There was just some negotiations, so they extended the, implementation until 16, 17. We're gonna have small incremental employer contribution increases, but the big share of the unfunded liability there will start in 16, 17. They're not as bad of a place as STRS, but it's also not right. Okay, well,
Further questions, recaps?
Overall, I think John asked the right question, is that the outlook now is better. And while we're feeling positive about this, I think the attention that we're trying to pay now, we're trying to learn from our past experiences that as quote-unquote good times return, we've got the multi-year projections now that show us where we've been. And I think these issues, and I'm not trying to throw a blanket of doom on anything, but I think the issues of our obligations for the post-employment retirement benefits and now the STRS obligation are going to be ongoing, continual parts of discussion about how we process new revenue and how we manage it. In addition to the really important thing, which is employees have been a number of years now without a cost of living adjustment, and we have to look at our employee health benefits. It's all just part of that total package of negotiations, it can't be looked at in isolation anymore. But we have some good news, we're not in a death spiral, and we're projecting 44% surplus. I mean, $44,000 surplus, I wish it was 44%.
Like, wow, I was just asking for 10.
And we finally had the opportunity to have a little bit of one-time funding drop into our regular.
Okay, thank you for all
And
4 or
thank
5
you-
of you in the
yeah,
audience.
Thank you, but thank
Thanks
you
for
to
being here.
Linda and
Yes,
Leangela as
thank you.
well. I know you guys push a lot of heavy
Crunch,
paper
crunch.
down there, and we appreciate it.
Thank you.
It was a good presentation.
Yeah, this is helpful because it doesn't, next month's meeting will be much easier.
Right.
with This information.
That was the
All right. Thank you, everybody. Session here.
No public comments?
Like, Ken, come on, what do you have to say?